Looks like you guys are awake this morning. You feeling good? All right, all right. Well, we have got some amazing stories for you this morning. Just to make sure we're all on the same page as we begin the next few minutes, last night Tito did a great job of talking about waking up to truth. You guys enjoy Tito last night? So did a really great job, and the danger of us when we believe lies, how that impacts us, how that makes us susceptible to some of the things that the enemy wants to do. And so this morning, you're gonna have a chance to hear over the next few minutes stories from a couple of people who have experienced and bought into some of those lies and how that has negatively impacted their life, and ultimately how God has wakened them to the truth of who He is, of who He's called them to be. And so would you this morning give a wake-up rush welcome to Kaitlin Scott and Micah Veal. Give it up for them. Come on up, you guys. Man, everybody's getting a chant this morning. Micah, what's up, man? There's your nice cup of cold water. Where's Kaitlin at? Somebody let Kaitlin, don't make her like climb up on the stage. Give it up for Kaitlin. Yeah. There you go, man. There's your water. So your mics should be in your chairs. They should be turned on, hopefully. Take a sip of water. Dude.
I'm thirsty.
All right, I don't feel so far away from you guys like I did yesterday.
We're a little closer today.
So go ahead and do a quick mic check. Say, what's up?
Hello. Good morning.
All right, so man, we are really, really excited to have you guys here with us. So both these guys are serving this week as small group leaders, and so, man, just honored to have you guys at Rush this week. So what I want, before we get into your stories, I want just take 30 seconds and just introduce yourself.
Hey, good morning. My name is Micah. Some of you guys know me, some of you guys know my dad, but I've been here for a long time. I grew up at Westridge. And yeah, man, happy to be here.
Yeah, that's good. Caitlin, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kaitlin. I'm a 6th grade small group leader for my girls. And I've been at Westridge since about 2019.
All right, good stuff. And if you don't know, Kaitlin and her husband Brent have 2 kids now.
We have 3.
3. 3 kids. Mm-hmm. All right, good stuff. So, last night, Tito talked about the danger of lies, right? The importance of truth, to waking up to the truth, how the enemy can use a lot of those lies against us. So you guys have each experienced that firsthand. So Mike, I want to start with you and just, like, let's talk about how the lies that you have bought into over the years and what ultimately that led to.
Sure, man. So yeah, my dad is one of the pastors that came here to start Westridge, and so I've been here since I was 2 years old. I grew up in the church, and you know, was coming up as what I thought to be a pretty strong Christian. But as I got into later middle school and early high school, I started to hear some things, particularly sciencey stuff that I just thought was really cool, and got into, and I started to see where it didn't completely match up with things that I was hearing at church. And so the first lie that I bought into was that I wasn't allowed to ask questions about these things. So no one will just come out and like say this to you. But there's kind of like an energy or an idea around church that when you have doubts, if you're a good Christian, you kind of just like sit them down and don't really talk about them. But the thing is that the absolute truth is the absolute truth. You're not going to catch it at a weird angle accidentally not being the truth, and so there's no reason not to, you know, be able to ask about it. There's a difference between questions of clarification and questions of doubt. When the angel Gabriel came to Zechariah to tell him that they were going to have John the Baptist, he said, "Hey man, I know you're pretty old, but you're going to have a kid." And Zechariah said to him, "Prove it." And so Gabriel said, "Okay." And he took away his voice for 9 months. But when he came to Mary, he said, "Hey, you're going to have a kid." And she said, how is that possible? And Zechariah answered and said, well, it's because of God. And she was exalted. And so both of them asked questions, but one of them came from a place of just genuinely wanting to know, and one of them came from a place of wanting God to prove it, right? And so that's the difference. And the questions that I had were, they were based in doubt, but it wasn't like prove it to me doubt. So, but regardless, I believe that lie anyways. And so I started to kind of have this little seed of doubt inside my heart. But I wasn't ready to give up on church. I'd been raised here, and this was my whole life. And so if I was going to pull out that bottom Jenga block, it would send my whole life just toppling over. All the things that I thought I knew, everything that I had, spent all my time learning and believing. And that thought terrified me. And so badly, I just didn't want to do it. And so what I did is I just kept going, and I kept coming. And that little seed just grew and grew, but I just pretended like it wasn't there. Until after about a year, that thing had grown in me so big that I just felt like such a liar, man, and such a hypocrite. And I'm sitting in church knowing at the bottom of my heart that I don't believe that God is real. And specifically during worship, man, it just ate me alive whenever I'm up there and praising to something that I don't think is there. And so when it just started to consume me, I went to my parents and I told them that I didn't share their faith anymore. And I was about 16 or 17 at this point. And it didn't go over very well, and I still was kind of made to go to church until I turned 18. And so where I had been kind of indifferent about church, now I'm having to go 2 times, 3 times a week, and I'm getting grounded if I'm not going. And so, I had been kind of indifferent, and now I'm not cool with the church. I don't want anything to do with it because it's, So, at that point, I just wanted nothing to do with it, and I got out, but I'm fresh. I've pulled out the bottom Jenga block, and I have all the room in the world to build, and I have no idea where to go. It's all new. So I kind of just went out into the world. I'm in high school, late high school, and I start going to, all the parties and the girls and the alcohol and the drugs and everything. Just trying to, I guess, just find what makes me happy, right? Because I didn't know what else to do. And so that was the second lie that I fell into, was that following my heart and what I thought I wanted would lead me to fulfillment and lead me to, a feeling of completeness and just happiness. But ultimately, I didn't find it there. So, yeah.
So, Kaitlin, let's go to you before we come back to Micah, because we're going to share the rest of his story. So, the lies that you had kind of bought into came during a series of depression in your life. In a lot of ways, just kind of about yourself. So share your journey with that and just what that led to ultimately.
So in 2019, after I had my second daughter, I was diagnosed with postpartum depression. If you don't know what that is, it's a chemical imbalance that happens in your brain after you have a baby, but it causes sometimes severe depression. And sometimes it can be short-lived, and sometimes it can be super long. Mine lasted a little over a year. Along with that, when I was in counseling for my depression, I was also diagnosed with OCD and having some intrusive thoughts that happen. Intrusive thoughts, if you aren't familiar, are like a thought that pops into your head, but it's not necessarily yours, or you're not controlling it, rather. And because I have OCD, it was on repeat a lot. So some of the examples that I had of the lies that were being told to me, so my intrusive thoughts are the lies that were being thrown at me. And some of those were, that God isn't real, he doesn't love me. And I've made so many bad mistakes that I've wrecked my salvation and he's turned his back on me. And when something is so scary like that, it's easy to buy into it. and believe that it is truth, even though it is a lie. So in that moment, it was just the worst part of my life, really. But I knew that if I couldn't, I believed that I had lost my salvation, and I thought that if I couldn't have God in my life, or if I couldn't be with God, then there was no point in living. So it got to a really difficult point for me.
And for you, I mean, talk a little bit, because you kind of grew up in church, but not really.
Right.
So, faith wasn't all that big of a deal in your life. Like, just kind of share a little bit about that.
Right. When I was in middle school, I went to a smaller church. I wasn't ever at Westridge. It's not too far from Dallas, but it was really, really small. I mean, the youth group there was like maybe 10 kids, and it was all genders and all ages. And so I went there in middle school, but by the time I got to high school, church was non-existent in my life. And honestly, God was kind of put on a shelf of, yeah, I believe in you and I love you, but I'm going to put you over here and I'm going to live my life. And I'll call on you when I need you. And that was pretty much the relationship until my postpartum depression. And at that point, I was out of high school for a while. And God used that to kind of, as a wake-up call for me.
So you go along, you kind of grew up in middle school, a little bit in church, but not all that much. Long period of time, not really involved in church at all. You and Brent get married, you have kids, then you struggle with postpartum depression and all of that. Talk about, then that struggle came to a head. You had mentioned one night kind of in the car with Brent. Like, talk about kind of what you were feeling that moment and what that ultimately led to, some of the things that you were feeling.
Right. So my intrusive thoughts, it was weeks long dealing with all of this and, just trying to figure out what's going on. I'd never experienced this before. Obviously, I'm not in an ideal mental state either. And we're driving home. We're driving home from a movie, and my husband's driving the car, and I was just so ready for him to pull off the side of the road into a ditch because I was done. And it was just really, really difficult to have that war going on in my head of, I don't want to feel this way, and is this really true? And if it is, my whole foundation has just been destroyed. And the one thing I thought I could count on, I feel like it's gone. And so, it got to a really, really difficult point.
Yeah. I don't know if any of you guys in your life have felt that, like where the lies have become so real and so overwhelming that you look just looking for an out, looking for something to make that end. Thankfully, for each of you, that's not the end of your story. So, Mike, let's come back to you for just a minute. Your struggle and kind of your doubts, and then your outright disbelief of church and Christianity and that kind of thing led you down a dark path, and kind of drugs led to rehab, and just a long struggle with that, which ultimately came to a head one night for you at your house. Just kind of talk about how ultimately God used some of those moments to reveal himself to you and the truth of who he is.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm 16, 17, 18, and I'm starting to go to parties. I'm beginning to get into alcohol and drugs, and no one starts off with a problem, but I know that I don't have a big bad God to take care of the things that are too big and too scary for me anymore. And the best that I can do on my own is just kind of pretend like they aren't there. So anytime I'm getting stuck or cornered or just not feeling like I'm ready, I'm running and I'm hiding and I'm escaping into something that can help me forget about it. And so time goes on, I get into college and I'm going forward and that starts to happen more and more frequently until all of a sudden it's happening every day, and then lots of times a day. And then, I turn around and all of a sudden there's this huge problem, and I don't know how it got there, even though it's not like it's been hiding. But, I don't know how I've let it get so bad. And so I begin to get into trouble, and I go from having, a 4.0 GPA in college to not showing up to any classes and failing out for like 3 semesters. And my career, my internship is in jeopardy. And the only way that I see to go forward is to check into rehab and go that way. I just didn't know what to do. So I went, and it was terrifying, man. I cried the first night. I was so scared. But I learned about myself. I learned about my disease, and I got some resources to help me with that. And I came out, but I was still on my own. I still didn't think that God was real, and so it only lasted for so long. It's hard. It's hard to do that, man, without God. So, but I know I have this feeling that just something's missing. I'm trying to fill this void, this hole in my chest, and I've got this voice, this liar who's speaking to me, saying, this will help, this will do it, take this thing, eat this thing, talk to this person, and I'm throwing it in there, and it's just disappearing like it never existed at all, because I had a God-sized hole in my chest, and nothing can, God is infinite, and so what's going to fill that hole, that infinitely wide hole? What can you put in there that's not going to get swallowed? So, time goes on, but I am becoming more and more aware that this is just not it, and I'm living in sin, and the thing about sin is that when you sin, something dies, and it's not like it's a rule. It's not like there's some referee up in the sky saying like, oh, there's a sin, and he throws his flag and blows a whistle and like, no, it's a penalty. It's like when I throw water on something, it gets wet because that's just how it works. When I sin, it is something dying. It might be someone's trust in you. It might be a relationship that you have. It might be an experience that you're putting into the trash that you're not going to be able to share with a special person later. But you get a little bit smaller every time. And so I'm living in sin, and I'm doing it every day, and it's like I'm taking a cheese grater and just shaving off a little piece of myself every day, and I'm getting smaller and smaller. And so one day, Dakota Adair hits me up and invites me to his small group. And I grew up with Dakota, and he lived with me. Dakota's my brother, man. And I knew that his whole heart was in this thing, and I knew that it would just crush him if nobody showed up to his thing. And so I came, because I just wanted to make sure that, someone came to my brother's thing. And so I went, and I go, and it turns out I had no need to worry, because there's like 35 people here, and it's packed out. And I get there, but I'm kind of awkward, and I'm not going to just walk out. So I stay, and it's nice, and I'm not opposed to church, I just know that that's not what I believe. But I didn't know how to tell them that I didn't believe. I didn't know how to tell them that I wasn't going to come back. So I just kind of kept coming back for a little bit. And then one day, just like a regular day, I just kind of was feeling anxious, and I didn't want to go, and I'd rather stay in my room. So I didn't go. And that night, 5 different people texted me, hey man, we love you, miss you, hope you come back. I'm just like, oh man, I feel terrible. So I came back out of guilt. But one nice thing about church is that it's not, Tim Tebow said at Passion this year, he said it's not a museum for perfect Christians, it's a hospital for the broken. And I wasn't ready to love on myself yet, but they were prepared to do that until I was. They loved me until I could love on myself. So I kept coming back. And I still didn't believe, but my life was just wasting away, and I had nothing to lose, and so I started to pray. to someone that I did not think was real, that he would come meet me and introduce himself to me, because I had gone and tried to look for him, and I couldn't find him. And so I said, God, you know, if you're out there, then please come say hi. I'd like to meet you. And so God waited 6 months. I prayed that prayer in November of 2020. And it wasn't until April that he chose to do that. He waited 6 months because he just knew I was a little turd, and I wasn't going to listen to what he had to say, you know? Like, if he could do anything, and I'd just be like, well, you know, it could be this or that. So no, I have to do something impossible. And so one day, it is April 20th, and I'm sitting in my room, and I'm in the middle of doing drugs. And I just decided, like, you know what, man, I'm over it. I'm like, what am I doing? This is not even fun. I'm not having fun anymore. And I decide I'm going to get rid of everything. And I get my stuff together, and I stand up, and I just realize that I'm too scared to do it. You know, this is where I'm safe, and this is where I'm comfortable. This is what I know. And that was the moment that God decided to come meet me. And as I'm sitting there in my room all by myself, just crying, man, about how I just can't do anything, how I'm worthless, and I don't have the power to do anything in my life. And it was there in that moment that I heard God say to me so clearly, he said, cast it out. And all of a sudden, I discover myself walking towards the door, and I've got all my things with me, and I'm walking out onto the porch, and I take my hand back, man, and I just throw that as hard and as far as I can, because I want it as far away from me as possible. And I come back inside, and I slam the door and just collapse onto the carpet, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what just happened? You know, I just watched myself do that, and it wasn't me. And I'm going into the bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror. I'm saying, God, you cheated. That's not how it works. Like, I lost. You know, I wasn't going to do it, and you came and did it for me anyways. But you know, that was God waited for an impossible moment because he knew that's what it would take to convince me. And that's kind of a big ask, right? Like, if I was to come to you and say, hey, I just need like a little bit of impossible. But he was prepared to do that for me, and I'm thankful that he did. God saved my life that morning. Or rather, he gave me a new one, I guess. So, yeah.
I just love the beauty and the depths of God's grace that he met you in your darkest hour.
Yeah.
And said that I love you and I'm willing to meet you here. Mm-hmm. Kaitlin, God met you in your darkest hour as well.
Yeah, he did.
So talk about what that looked like, that night in the car, and you're feeling that, wanting your husband to just kind of pull the car over into a ditch somewhere and just for it to be over, and how God met you there and over the course of the next few weeks and months.
Right. So at that point, I knew that I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. I've been trying for weeks at this point, and it's just not cutting it. It's getting worse. And so I start reading my Bible for the first time in a really long time. I start listening to worship music on repeat. Like, I was going to sleep listening to podcasts of Brian every Sunday, and listening to worship music constantly during the day, because I needed to completely remove myself from the world, really, and just stay with God. And I was clinging to him, really, with everything that I had. And even though I thought he's already gone, but I'm still holding on. And so through that, God showed me that, you know, I've never left you. I know that you think that I have, but I never will. And that truth was just, he really just showed me very clearly that I'm not going anywhere. There's nothing that you can do, nothing that you have done. I'm sorry. That I could do that's going to make him leave or make him, not love me anymore, and it's just so the opposite of what was being thrown in my head. And just really him showing up in that way and really getting me through that entire year, because I didn't do that. God did that. I mean, if it was up to me, I wouldn't be here. God's the one that pulled me out. So, I mean, in that truth of, when I thought that if I had done things wrong, I needed to run the opposite way from God because he was mad or he wasn't going to love me or he wasn't going to accept me. The truth is the opposite. I need to run towards him because he's going to be there with open arms to put me back together every time.
It's incredible.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
We were unprepared for the tissues up here. Thank you. So I want to, just one last question for each of you just to have a moment. There's so many lies, right, that we buy into every single day. So many lies that we're susceptible to, and the enemy just plants those lies all the time. For you, what would you say is that key truth that for you that has resonated, that you've grabbed onto, that you want students in the room to know and to believe, even in the midst of some of the lies that the enemy is throwing at them? What would be that key truth that you would want them to grab a hold of?
C.S. Lewis says that our bodies are engines that run on God. And when you begin to put other things in there as fuel, worldliness and parties and girls or whatever else, then things start to get a little bumpy and you get engine problems and your check engine light comes on. I had this liar living in my head saying, this will make you feel better, and I'd do it and it didn't, and he'd say, okay, well, but this time it will. And he's just such a good liar. He's so convincing, and I believed him. But I know that I have a God-sized hole here, and nothing can fill it besides him. I know that when I went out there, I spent all my time thinking about myself and what I wanted to do and what would make me happy. And if you show me somebody who spends all their time thinking about their self, I will show you someone who is miserable, because the more you think about yourself, the more miserable you are. And so, you might look at me and say, I'm chasing my bliss, I'm doing my thing, and I'm happy. But I can look at you and know that deep down, you don't really believe yourself, and that when you go to bed, you spend your time daydreaming about things that you don't have, instead of smiling about the things that you do. So, that was the difference for me, where I was always wanting more. I was feeding something that was never full and was always hungry. And now my days are relatively simple. I'm not going and doing crazy things, but I find myself smiling on the way home in my car saying, this is life, when nothing even really has happened, but I'm fulfilled. Going out and partying and doing whatever else, those things are fun. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that they're not. If I said that, then you wouldn't believe another word that I had to say. They're fun, but they're not fulfilling. And at the end of the day, you still are wanting something. You go to bed and it's just something else that you still want. And I don't have that anymore. And I'm thankful that I finally learned the truth.
That's awesome. It's good. What about for you, Kaitlin?
So for me, it was learning, though, that, when I'm going through something, instead of running away from God, I need to lean on him and let him take care of it, because he's big enough to. And also, with my postpartum depression, it was the worst part of my life, but it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. And it's a weird way to view it, but my relationship with God transformed through that. My marriage and my relationship with my kids and their relationship with God transformed through that. And so, he used something that was terrible for a radical switch and, change of course in our life. And so, I guess the key truth in that is, even if you're going through something and you feel like you're in a tunnel and you can't see the way out, just let God lead you through, because he knows the way out and he's going to get you through. And, relying on him that what's on the other side is far better than what you could have imagined.
That's good. Well, I think we're all amazed by both of your stories, and ultimately not you, but what God has done in your life. And so thank you for each being vulnerable, being willing to get on the stage and just share the ugliness and yet the beauty of what God can do. And so would you give it up for Micah and Kaitlin this morning? You guys can hang right there for just a second. So maybe God is right now in this moment using Micah and Kaitlin's story to open your eyes to see some of the lies that you've bought into, some of the things that what I think Micah said it, what makes the enemy so good. He's such the deceiver. We're being deceived, and yet we don't know that we're being deceived. And so it takes an awakening. It takes God to open our eyes to see, no, that's a lie, and here is what the truth actually is. And so our prayer and our hope is that this morning, that today, that maybe some of those lies that you've bought into, that God would open your eyes to see the truth of who he is, of who he says you are, and that you would begin to live in the power of the truth and experience freedom in the midst of that. And so let me pray for us, and then we'll finish up this morning. God, thank you so much for this morning. Thank you, God, for what you have done and are doing in Micah's life, in Kaitlin's life. God, it is nothing short of your grace, of your goodness, of your power on display. And so ultimately, you get the glory for it. And so we just thank you. We thank you, God, that you met each of them in the midst of their brokenness. God, that you didn't wait for them to believe before you changed them. You didn't wait for them to clean themselves up. You met them where they were, in the depths of their brokenness, and they're crying out for you for something, and yet you showed up because of your love for them. And so, God, thank you that you met them there, and then thank you, God, that you are transforming their life and allowing them to experience the truth of who you are and the freedom that comes with that. God, I pray that this morning that you would do the same for students who are in this room. God, that you'd open their eyes to see, that you would allow them to experience the truth of who you are and who you say that they are. And we love you in Jesus' name. And everybody said,